Hi there, welcome back to the archives. To do a video, and again, I'm sharing this from The Hanging of Angélique, the untold story of Canadian slavery and the burning of Old Montreal by Dr. Afua Cooper. What a gorgeous cover, too. Um, and so, and the, even I wanted to go through chapter three. Chapter three of this book is called The Secret of Slavery in Canada. And so, slavery in Canada is, it says slavery, it starts this chapter says, slavery is Canada's best kept secret. And I would agree. Because again, it wasn't until I was in my 20s I really started to click that, like, oh, it was happening here too. Because was not taught that. Right? Growing up, like I said, the book I'm sharing now on Sojourner Truth literally was a book, I think it was my mom's copy because she was a teacher. And that was what she was teaching her students. I'm pretty sure that's also what I read growing up in the Catholic system, which I also want to say you have to recognize that whose story gets told in school. I never learned this story. I learned Sojourner Truth. To me, no shade to Sojourner Truth, but I have to question why she was palatable enough for Catholics to teach about slavery. Right? She actually was not that radical. No shade, no disrespect to Sojourner Truth. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. But she was safe enough to be the entry point to teach us. These are not the stories we learned. We learned about Sojourner Truth, who was a good Christian, and right. So, anyways, slavery was an institutionalized practice for over 200 years here. Canada engaged in it as well too, and so there's a historian basically that was saying that some of the earliest shipyards of some of the older Canadian colonies, they were constructed for use in the British slave trade. And while Canada was not a slave society, she writes that it was a society. I'm reading directly from this, okay? So don't be like, aren't they doing plagiarism? Like you see me reading. Some are direct quotes, some I'll remix. But so basically, Canada was not a slave society, but it was a society whose economy was based on slavery. Okay, um, it shared these features with other countries, including the United States. And so it was institutionalized for 206 years. And it's usually it says that we associate the word slavery with the United States, not with Canada. Canada is usually seen as like the freedom, the refuge, right? The Underground Railroad came here, especially between 1830 and 1860, which is a period where the Underground Railroad was running, right? Where thousands of American runaway slaves escaped to and found refuge in the British territories to the north, right? That is true. That did happen. However, it shouldn't foreshadow and overshadow the fact that, like, part of Canada's identity was slavery. Okay, we were also a slaveholding republic. Um, and so I wanted to share this part here of the vision we get when we think of, when most people, I'll read it directly, when most people think of slavery, they see a huge cotton or sugar cane plantation worked by hundreds of slaves with blood dripping down their back as they endure constant whipping from the slave drivers. The slaveholder, usually a male, sits on the veranda of his mansion fanned by docile young slaves. I wanted to share that because again, we see this even in Black History Month. Still see this discourse of Black people are lazy, Black women are lazy, Black people are lazy, 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 right? As if billionaires are the hardest working people. That's a myth. Who is a lazy one in this situation? Sitting on the veranda drinking lemonade that somebody else is giving them. But they were the owners. They were the ones that had the money. The ones that were hardworking were literally working for free. So this idea that like hard work equals money and profit, and please let it die. Okay, it's you see that some of the hardest working people barely work. I'm trying to be on that. No shade. I don't. I You can shame me what you. I'm trying to be on that now because I did the other thing. You saw in the book to at 10 years old, my family were bragging about how I was a hardworking young lady. I was. I've always been hardworking because I bought into that what they told me. Hard work equals money. This is how you make it. I did everything they asked, went to school, did all the degrees, the work, the job. But what did that hard work do? Anyways, I'm not gonna get. That's what I wanted to share, right? The one who was lazy, who was a hardworking. So basically, that image of the slave holder basically chilling on the veranda while all of the black enslaved work, she says that's usually drawn from southern United States or the Caribbean of slavery, a version of slavery, right? Most people don't associate it with Canada's early history. You don't think of, when you think of slavery, you don't think of enslaved working in the snow, right? Being whipped in the snow, having to stand outside in the snow. Um, but that would have been reality. And so here in Canada, it was primarily the French and the English who were slaveholders. And so Dr. Cooper goes into a definition of slavery, which you should read on page 70. She goes on to talk about the connections between Black enslaved and the Native Indigenous folks of Canada. And basically it says from 1628. So in America, they talk about 1619. Canada was from 1628 to 1833. Slavery was legal and acceptable institution in both French and British Canada and was vigorously practiced. So if you remember from the video I did of 1626, New York in 1626, you remember that transition from 1626 to 1627? It was around 1627 that the British beat the Dutch to kind of start claiming more land, where the British influence comes, right? So a year later, we see that in Canada, and it's with the British and the French. And so slavery was legal, and it was an acceptable institution in both French and British colonies, right? Sometimes you'll hear about the French version, but not the English version, both. And so it is a little bit complicated, right? Because when people say, well, enslaved Africans built this city in the country, and people are like, well, no, my ancestors built it, and it was a whole mix up here. So when the European settlers arrived, obviously the indigenous folks were here. They tried to enslave them too. But it says the enslavement of native people declined rapidly and gave Europeans a notion that natives could not withstand slavery, right? So there was the assumption that black people were sturdier. Europeans began to bring black African captives into the colonies to work as slaves, right? And so it was basically seen that blacks appear somewhat better able to withstand physical demands of slavery. You still see that in medical psychology today. Not medical psychology, medical medicine, right? Black people are stronger, and so they don't feel as much, right? They were doing surgeries and stuff with us without any sort of anesthesia. Even today is really folks with sickle cell. God forbid you have sickle cell. You go to the hospital during a crisis to say you are in pain. They won't believe you, right? So you still see that logic. Somehow we are inferior. We are the less superior race. Yet when it comes to all of these different things, they still need us to do it for them. So we are stronger than you. You just admitted we're stronger, but we're not less educated, right? And so you see that it's like it's just made up. It just made up bullshit just to get people to work for free. And so in Canada, the recorded enslavement of black people began with a young boy from Madagascar. Madagascar is in in Africa. You usually see the continent of Africa, and then there's like that little island off there. That is Madagascar. Madagascar's capital city is Antananarivo or something like that. I can never pronounce it, but I do know it. Let's check it now. Madagascar capital. How do you pronounce it properly? It's Antananarivo. Let's see. I know it, but I can't pronounce it. Antananarivo. Okay? Antananarivo is the capital of Madagascar. Rivo. I always say Riva. And so there's a young boy from Madagascar, an English pirate, and a Quebec clerk. So in 1628, David Kirke and his brother, as well as other pirates, overwhelmed the defense of Quebec, and they seized the feeble French colony for England. Kirke had with him a 9-year-old African boy. I'm reading directly from here, okay? Kirke sold the boy, whose African name is unknown, to a Quebec clerk. So that's the first recorded documentation of an enslaved person in Canada was in 1628. It was a black boy from Madagascar who was sold off to a Quebec clerk. Quebec in Canada is a francophone province. Most of Canada speaks English or is bilingual English and French. Quebec is the only francophone province. It's next to Ontario, and then you're going into the East Coast, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. Okay? For those who don't know Canadian geography. And so basically, the boy was sold a second time to another clerk, Guillaume Couillard, a friend of Samuel de Champlain. Okay? And by 1632, the Kirkes had departed the colony, so they left, and Quebec had reverted to the French. The boy from Madagascar was baptized in 1633, and he was named Olivier Le Jeune in honor of his godfather, who was a Jesuit priest, Paul de Jeune. And the first documented enslaved died in Quebec in 1654. And so that is the first documented enslaved African in Canadian history, was a young black boy who came from Madagascar. Again, Madagascar is off the coast of Africa. Okay, so I'm going to end this here and I'm going to continue to get into this. So just stay tuned for more.